there are solar panels that are called bifacial solar panels. Those are the panels that we're using on our projects here in Nova Scotia. And what actually happens is you collect energy on one side of the sun, but also on the backside. So the backside is clear, and there are solar cells on the backside. So all the light that bounces off the ground or the other equipment gets collected. So we're using a lot more efficient technologies. And yeah, so there's lots going on. And in terms of projects, the projects we're working on right now with Area are the biggest ones in the province currently. And we're really proud to be leading the effort in Atlantic Canada. And these projects are only getting bigger, and there's only more coming. So it's a great time for sure to be in solar energy.
Nice, thank you. That's really cool. I'd never heard about solar panels that are using both sides. And I suppose you did touch on this before, but does Nova Scotia currently have any solar farms, or are we working towards any?
Yeah, there are a few projects. If you know the store IKEA, on the roof of IKEA, there's actually some of the biggest solar projects in the province. Nova Scotia Power as well does have a few, but the ones we're building now are about 2 or 3 times the size of those, and they're only getting bigger, which is great.
And how many years might a solar panel actually last throughout its lifetime?
Yeah, that's a great question. On average, it's about 25 years. And so once the project reaches about 25 years, you can take those solar panels out, recycle them, and install new ones, and then keep the project going for a long time.
Nice. Now, this is a question that comes in from Duncan, Cape Breton, and they say it was mentioned in the video that in Malawi you had to clear trees and other vegetation prior to putting up a solar farm to kind of make that space. And they're curious about environmental assessments, and are there any of that trees and vegetation relocated? Are there anything? Does anything happen to offset the environmental impact of cutting all that much vegetation down?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that a lot of community members, when we build projects here in Nova Scotia, ask about as well. Firstly, a solar project is significantly better for the environment than the trees on that same piece of area. But oftentimes projects will commit to replanting trees somewhere else that we can't build solar. So we're offsetting the trees that were cut. In Africa, specifically on that project in Malawi, I don't know if it would have come up in the video, but they have these big trees. They're called baobab trees, and they are of religious and community importance. And on this specific project, we had actually built around this tree. So these trees you need about 25 people holding hands all the way around. They're absolutely massive. And there's rumors that there are ghosts in them. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't cut that tree down because of how important it was for the community. So we can always get creative on avoiding as many trees to cut as possible, but we can replant them elsewhere to make sure that impact is mitigated.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, what are bit of a more sciencey question here, what are solar panels actually made out of?
That's a great question. So one of the main ingredients or main materials is called silicone. Silicone can be in all sorts of different forms. There's also cobalt, so lots of different metals and materials that are found just naturally in the ground, mostly in Asia and in Africa as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
And do you know of any schools that are utilizing solar energy, or any projects that are looking into that in the future?
That's a great question. I'm not entirely sure if there are schools that have solar installations. One of the things what we're trying to do with these 3 projects is to actually include and involve the schools to make sure that they're properly educated and can do sort of mini field trips once they are built. And we hope that area can continue to grow that program, because it's very important that the schools are involved and are aware that this is right in their backyard, because this is the future for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, what happens if there's not sun for a few days? What happens to the solar panels then?
That's a great question. So even when it's a cloudy day, if I'm standing next to my friend, I can still see them. So what that means is that there's still light coming through the clouds, not as much as like a clear blue sky, but we can still get energy from even a cloudy day, just not as much.
Perfect. Now, this is another question from Duncan School in Cape Breton. So how does a solar panel actually work? They know that light hits the solar panel, but how is it absorbed?
That's a good question. So when we were talking about in the video about what's called photons, photons are basically these little packets of energy that come from the sun. So they travel very, very far, and they come all the way to our solar panel. And once they hit the solar panel, there's a little circuit, just something like an electrical in your phone, right? And what happens is it excites a little bit of material, and there are things you may be aware of electrons, and it knocks that electron out and pushes it down the circuit. So this cycle that the electrons are causing from the energy called photons actually is what powers from the sun.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now, how much do solar panels actually cost?
It depends. If you buy 230,000 of them at a time, they're a lot cheaper. But on average, roughly around $300 to $400 each is a good estimate.
Interesting. And they do get cheaper with expensive startup costs when you're buying a lot?
That's right. Just like if you go to Costco and you buy a big pack of pasta, it's a bit cheaper than if you buy just one individual at a time. Yeah.
Right. That's a very good analogy. Now, what ages are the people who work in the solar industry?
It's a good question because it's quite young. Of course, on the construction side or government or things like that, they tend to be just sort of your average parents' working age. But a lot of the specific to solar energy stuff tends to be more young people like myself, because, like I had mentioned, solar in Canada is only really getting started. And so as I came through school and started working, we had a kind of a new generation, just like you folks are going to be that new generation. And I'm excited. So generally a bit older, but there's quite a mixture for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, once the energy has been captured in the solar panels, how do we get the energy from the solar panel into people's homes and schools and businesses?
That's a great question. So when energy is produced from a solar panel, it's producing what's called DC energy. It's called direct current energy. That means that flow of electrons I was talking about, it's moving in one direction. What happens is we take that energy, we collect a lot of the solar panel's energy together, and then we feed it into a device called an inverter. And what an inverter does is it converts that DC, the direct current energy, into AC, which is what's called alternating current. And that's the useful kind of electricity that when you plug your laptop into your wall or your fridge, we're using at home what's called AC power. So once that power and that energy has been converted, it gets stepped up in voltage, which is what's called potential difference. And then that gets sent into the power lines. So almost directly to the power lines. And then that gets distributed just like all the other electricity that's generated for your home.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Now, how can you help with climate change other than using solar panels?
Oh, there's plenty of ways. I mean, if we're talking about just generating energy or through electricity, there's of course other clean methods such as wind energy, which you might have seen a lot of wind turbines in Nova Scotia. There is what's called geothermal energy, and that uses the heat from the inner core of the earth to heat up water and use a steam plant. That's not very common in Canada, but it's starting to grow. And then as well, specific to Nova Scotia and the Maritimes, which is quite exciting, is what's called tidal energy. Tidal energy is using the energy of waves in the ocean to actually generate power. So it works kind of like a wind turbine, but underwater. And there's quite a few projects that are starting to be developed and are currently installed in the Bay of Fundy, the biggest tide in the world. And if we were to use that to its maximum capacity, we would be able to generate enough energy, electricity, for the entire northeast of North America, which is a ton of power. Power. Yeah. But in terms of other clean energy or clean things that we can do to fight climate change, of course, reducing the amount of meat we eat, reducing, converting to electric cars, all sorts of things, reducing the use of electricity. So maybe opting to use like a candle that I use when I work versus the lights. I don't have any lights on. This is just the sun. There's all sorts of things that we can do to fight climate change on ourselves.
Yeah, and that's a lot of that reducing energy is what we talk about in our Green Schools presentations.
Yeah, that's great.
Nova Scotia's goal. That's really cool, and especially I bet there's a lot of schools in the valley that have joined from here, and they're sort of learning that they have this massive amount of potential clean energy sort of right in their backyards. So maybe some innovation that'll be happening there in the next few decades.
Absolutely.
Now,
yeah.
When we think about Canada, there's a whole lot of land that's really up north in the Arctic Circle where there isn't sun for even 6 months of the year. Are there any solar farms up there?
That's a great question, and there actually are. It's not for about, like you said, about half the year it's quite dark, so it's not very useful when there's no sun in the sky. But for 6 months of the year, it's sunshine all the time. And a lot of these remote, especially indigenous communities, depend on very dirty and expensive diesel generators. And they're finding that a solar installation, although it's really only useful for about 6 months a year, can really reduce the cost and the impact on the environment in their communities by installing solar. And there are actually quite a few. And interestingly, because of the angle of where the sun is at the North Pole or in the northern regions, solar panels are normally kind of like on an angle about 10 degrees, 15 degrees. In places in the north, the solar panels are actually installed completely vertical because the sun goes around like this. So you have this very interesting looking solar field, completely different to anywhere else in the world.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Now, we talk a lot about the increased amount of storms that we have due to climate change and the oceans warming up. Was there much damage to solar panels from Hurricane Fiona? And is that kind of something we should be worried about moving forward?
It's definitely something that we consider when we are designing the project. The biggest concern with hurricanes and solar tends to be how much wind there is. So when you have a very flat sheet and a lot of wind, it can cause quite a force. But there was no damage on any of the solar projects that are currently in Nova Scotia, but certainly is considered in designs, and we try to mitigate a lot of that using vegetation around the site that can protect a lot of the wind. But yeah,
that's really cool. Like natural green ways to protect against erosion, against storms. Now, how much energy does one industrial or residential solar panel produce, and how do you figure out how many panels that you need to install in a certain area?
It depends. I think there's two ways. I think one way is you have a plot of land, so where the project is actually going to be. And usually what happens is you just try to fit as many panels as possible. You want to produce as much energy. It's the most cost-effective way, and we're here to build as much clean energy as possible, so that tends to be the case. If it's something like in your backyard or on your roof, which you might see some people have, that tends to be just what is their electricity demand? What do they need just to satisfy their home? And that's usually how they'll size their systems.
Cool. So it's different if it's going onto a power grid versus just being used by a local home.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, this might be a bit of a history lesson for some of us, but do you know where the idea of solar panels actually came from?
I believe the first solar panel was invented in Germany in the mid 1970s.
Wow,
Yeah, yeah,
that's a while ago.
yeah, but not very efficient. It wasn't very good, and it was about 10,000 times as expensive as it is today. Yeah.
Now, how long has the business that you work for been in business? And are there a lot of startup businesses in this sector?
Yeah, so I think area has been around for about 8 or 9 years, and certainly there's lots of startups that are in the space. Whether it be developing and building solar, the contractors, the construction crews, a lot of companies are either starting up here or they're moving in from elsewhere in Canada now that Atlantic Canada is growing so much. But then there's also other, businesses that are just 1 degree next to building the solar or developing it. So it could be things like once the solar plant is built, who maintains it? Somebody has to operate and maintain, keep an eye on things. There's all sorts of technologies that are being developed to make it a lot easier to maintain and make sure that we're operating, at peak efficiency.
Mhm. Now, when we mine all the stuff that we need to create solar panels, how much do those panels then balance out the pollution added to the atmosphere from mining the resources required to make them?
That's a great question. And it's generally more advantageous to have the material out of the ground for solar panels, but we do recognize that ethical ways of mining are required to make sure that we're not disturbing other natural landscapes to a detriment or to negatively impact the planet overall.
Cool.
Yeah.
This is more of a personal question, but do you have solar power in your own home?
Not yet. Not yet. No, we'd love to. We do have an electric car, which we very much enjoy. But solar panels are next for sure.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, do solar panels ever get hit by lightning, and what would happen if they did?
They would blow up. It's not very common because they are generally pretty low to the ground. And if ever you've seen lightning on TV or on YouTube, it's usually something very tall that gets struck by lightning. And so, for example, on our project sites, we have a big pole right in the middle, and that's for the security cameras. So it's likely that if the project were to get struck by lightning, it would just be that pole. But if it were to actually, strike on the solar panels, it would blow up for sure. Yeah.
Now, how long do you think solar panels will be around for? Because we talk about the innovation and the growth in solar panel technology over the past 50 or so years. Do you think there'll be something different that comes in the future?
Yes, I think that solar panels will be with us probably our entire lives, but there are new methods of generating electricity that I think will be more popular, but probably only in about 50 to 100 years. And I think that this will be good research for you folks, but looking up fusion power, it's a type of nuclear energy that is just on the cusp of actually working, but there's a tremendous amount of money and intellectual brain power being put to making sure that does work. It's a form of nuclear energy, but it's significantly cleaner than anything else. But it's going to take some time for sure.
Cool. Maybe a research project from our classes at home.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Now,
Yeah.
we live somewhere that has some pretty harsh winters. And what happens when solar panels get covered in snow? And maybe do they have systems to clear off the snow and ice?
That's a great question. So things that are dark tend to absorb a lot of heat. That's why solar panels are black. We want to absorb the energy. And when things absorb energy and heat, the panel gets warmer. So a lot of times when there's a very light snow, the panels will melt the snow just automatically. If there's a heavy snow and it gets compacted, it will cover the solar panel. And there's one of two things that normally happens. If it's a big project, normally we leave it until it melts because it's not very efficient for somebody to go with a brush on every panel row by row. But if it's smaller projects like in someone's backyard or on their roof or in a small business, normally what happens is someone will just go out with a broom basically and just sweep it off the panel. Yeah.
Cool. Now, how many panels roughly by your estimate would you need on a house to just not have a power bill and not have to pay anything?
It depends like what the demand is, but 8 to 10 panels is all you really need to power your house for sure.
Cool. And this is an interesting question, but do solar powered windmills exist?
I don't think so. I mean, that would be a pretty neat invention. One of the things that use a lot of energy in a wind turbine is once it's spinning, it's quite efficient. But to get that wind turbine started requires energy. So sometimes it will pull energy from the grid to push a motor and turn it. That being said, if you had solar panels, you could do that, and then you could have a solar powered windmill.
That's really cool. Maybe a new idea there. Maybe you've sparked something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, how far can the DC power travel from the panels before it has to be converted into AC?
It can travel quite far, but usually it's not very far. So when we have big rows of solar panels, you might have seen, usually at the end of one of those rows is the inverter. So it doesn't have to travel very far actually.
Cool. And where do you find and put your solar panels?
Most of the manufacturing is in Asia. So that'd be China and South Korea. There is manufacturing in Europe and in the United States as well. There's very little solar panels that are made in Canada at this stage, but hopefully they change that.
Cool. And these are often quite major projects with, I know in the video with Malawi, there are over 300 people locally employed working on it. Are there any work hazards that come with solar system installations?
Definitely. It's just like any other construction. We have lots of big equipment on site. There's a lot of high voltage electrical equipment that's being used. There's all sorts of hazards with digging in the ground and ensuring that everybody's safe. But safety is number one on every construction site, no matter where you are. And we make sure that our crews are properly protected with the right protective equipment, like helmets and safety vests and things like that, steel toe boots, but also the right training to make sure that everybody's aware of the risks and knows how to mitigate them. So certainly, yeah.
Nice. Now, do different light sources make solar panels work, or is it just the sun?
Any light source works. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Now, what's the biggest sized solar panel that you have built?
In terms of a project, it would be the one in Malawi. It was what's called 60 megawatts. And each panel, like I said, was 330 watts. And to put it into context, 1 megawatt in Canada powers about 1,200 homes. That project was 60 megawatts. And in Malawi, the project or the population there use about 30 times less electricity than we do here on average. And that leads to enough power for over 2.2 million people approximately.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a pretty major project.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, do solar panels still work if the power goes out?
They actually do. Yep. Yeah, so that's a big advantage of having solar at your home or at your school or at your business, is that you can keep doing whatever you're doing as long as you're collecting energy. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And what country has the most or uses the most solar panels or solar energy? Just has the most solar?
China. China. Yeah.
Is that a pretty significant margin, or?
Yeah. Mostly because they manufacture most of the solar panels and they have a large population. that is growing quite a bit. So they've built a lot of solar. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And a more technical question here, but how are solar panels actually made?
Very complicated manufacturing process, but putting it simply, there's a layer of glass on one side. There's the wafers. So they're like very, very, very thin black squares of silicone that have very complicated electrical circuits. And then another layer of glass. And all of that is wrapped around in a steel frame or an aluminum frame.
Cool.
Yep.
Here in Nova Scotia, where and how are solar panels recycled? Do they ever need to get recycled? How does that work?
That's a great question. Currently, there aren't many projects that have reached the end of their life cycle that need to be recycled. But if they do need to be recycled, there's one of two ways. There are companies that accept them and break them apart to recycle them properly, or oftentimes you can send them back to the manufacturer. And what the manufacturer will do is take that material and then use it for new solar panels.
Cool. So very recyclable product.
Yep.
Nice. Now, is it better to have residential solar panels on your roof or in your yard?
It depends. If you don't have too much space, then the roof is the best. But if you have the space, having it on the ground in your yard is a little easier to maintain, because if something goes wrong, you don't need to climb on the roof and try to fix that. So yeah.
Yeah, but it's easier for clearing snow too.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how long does it usually take to manufacture a solar panel?
Probably each one would be, I mean, it's in a manufacturing line, so there's lots going on at once, but probably just only like an hour, honestly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really fast.
Yeah.
And this might be something for the Guinness Book of World Records, but do you know of the biggest solar panel and the smallest solar panel ever made? Is that a record that's kept track of?
I think the biggest solar panel is at about 600 watts, and the biggest project is currently in construction. I believe it's in India, and it's 1,200 megawatts. So very, very, very large. I think to drive from one end to the other, it takes about 30 minutes.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's a lot of solar panels.
Yeah.
And this solar panel that you said was the biggest in the world, how many if I was looking at it, how many feet by how many feet would it be?
Yeah, probably about like 7 feet by 4 feet, or like 2.5 meters by 1.5 meters, something like that. Yeah.
Interesting. So more of the size comes from the amount of solar panels rather than just making one that's bigger.
That's right. Yep.
Cool. And how many watts of power does it take, or does the Malawi farm produce in a day? Do you know that number?
I'd have to use my calculator, but let me just see here. It is 60 times 1,000 times 10. About 600,000 watts in a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
Yeah. And a big advantage in Africa, as most of you are probably aware, is there's a lot of sun in Africa. So you have much longer days for sun, and the sun is much more intense. I was very burnt every time I would go to Africa because my Canadian skin couldn't handle it.
Now, do solar panels affect the production of oil?
That's a good question. I think ultimately that is kind of the goal, where we're trying to reduce the amount of oil we consume or we use for electricity generation. So it does have an impact, but that's kind of where we're trying to get to with fighting climate change. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Be emerging as an alternative to oil.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Now, this is a very local question to Halifax, but how many solar panels roughly would it take to power all of Halifax?
Whew. I'd have to do the math on that, but probably somewhere close to 300,000 solar panels. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Do you think that that would be a project that would be feasible in the future, or is that just kind of way out of the realm of imagination?
I don't think it's unfeasible, feasible, but I do believe that for, addressing clean energy in Halifax, I think wind turbines will play a big role in that for sure, along with
Mhm.
solar. Wind doesn't take as much space. Obviously, it goes up, but with solar, you need quite large plots of land to get that much capacity.
Cool. And how much do they, or how do they decide how far apart solar panels need to be when they're being installed? How does that measurement occur?
That's a great question. We use a software program called PV-SYST. So PV is in what we were talking about earlier, photovoltaic, and SYST as in system. And we can simulate the design that we come up with the engineering team. So we can decide exactly how far apart they need to be to make sure that, you can see my hand is sunny right now. You can see that if I put my hand behind it, there's shadows, right? So you don't want to have the next solar panel under the previous one. So you just want to make sure that you have enough spacing. And then look, both my hands are bright right now. So we can calculate that on the computer before we build it.
And I'm imagining that would be very specific to the location you're building them in, correct?
Exactly.
Right. Do solar panels have on and off switches?
They do not. The way we turn them off is we turn that inverter I was talking about earlier, that machine where it collects all the energy. There's a switch on that. So unless you were to unplug one solar panel, you have to unplug 20 at a time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And is there anything that's dangerous about having the solar panel still taking in power but not actually connecting to a grid or anything?
As long as you don't touch your fingers on both tips, just like an outlet, then you're safe.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, what are any current projects that you're working on or that your company's working on?
So we have 3 projects. Like I said, they are the biggest in the province right now. One is in Mahone Bay on the South Shore. One is in Berwick in the Valley. That is the biggest project that we do have. And then our third one is in Antigonish, so near Cape Breton.
Nice.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit more about what those projects are aiming to do? Like what's going to come out of those?
Yeah, so a lot of those, or all those projects, the municipalities, the towns, wanted to generate a lot of their own power, clean energy. And so all this power is going to be powering directly those towns. So the communities, the people that are living there, can actually subscribe. They can buy into the project and decide, hey, I want to buy this electricity because it's clean, rather than some of the dirty electricity that we would have seen in that graph from sort of the overall grid. So it's a really neat way to do it.
Cool. Now I have one final question for you that I'm hoping will tie some things together. So during my job, I do a whole bunch of presentations about global warming and about climate change. And I've noticed that quite a common reaction to learning about the impacts of climate change is a feeling of hopelessness. And to be fair, I often feel the same way because climate change is a really daunting problem and can make the future seem quite scary. But in your experience, how does solar energy impact people's hope for the future?
I think that most importantly is that this is a problem. No doubt, it's very large, but it is solvable. It's agreed upon that there are specific things that we need to do, all of us, that we can actually solve this problem. So the most important thing is collaboration, but the other most important thing is that everybody has a role to play, and everybody needs to decide what is important for me, what is a problem that you are passionate about, and just go tackle it. I mean, you're not going to solve it completely yourself anyway, but any effort that goes towards it will will help fight it for sure. And just know that it is possible, but we have to put our actions first. And that's what's most important.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your input. I want to thank you for joining us here today. I know that I learned a lot, and I'm hoping that all the classes that joined us from all over Nova Scotia feel that they left this with a lot more knowledge about green careers and where the possibilities are for them and how to build their future in renewables if that's something that they're interested in. So thank you so much for coming. I can see some thank yous popping out in the chat, people singing your praises, Joe, from all over the province. Well done. I do, before we head out, want to give a little plug to classes that may be joining us for the first time with Green Schools here. We're a program that works all across Nova Scotia. We have engagement officers, some of them who are on the call today, that are stationed in the north, in Cape Breton, around Halifax, in the valley, in southern Nova Scotia, and they engage both virtually and in person all year round. They'll sometimes come to your classroom, or both virtually and in person. They'll talk about energy. We have a bunch of different topics we cover. We cover solar energy, we cover light, we have our outcomes that are specific to grade outcomes. So we have a whole bunch of different presentations that we can offer. We also offer presentations in French, which I do as the CSAP or bilingual officer, but we would love to engage with your classrooms. Please, we'll be sending out an email to everyone. Please reach out if you'd like to book an engagement, and check out our bi-weekly newsletter that will be coming out soon next week. And thank you so much. Thank you, Joe. Thank you to all the classes that joined. We hope you all learned lots today.
Thanks, everyone. Much appreciated for your time. Hopefully, I answered some of your questions. And yeah, looking forward to seeing your generation take on solar energy for sure.